There's a moment that has defined bodybuilding history for nearly 50 years. Two men standing on a stage in South Africa. Just before the results are announced, one leans over to the other and says something, quietly enough that no microphone could capture it, and understood fully only by the two men present. The one who leaned in was Arnold Schwarzenegger. The one who received the message was Lou Ferrigno. What passed between them in those few seconds appears to have left a lasting fracture, one that decades of time, public appearances, and reconciliation gestures have not fully closed. Arnold said as much himself. In late 2024, on a podcast that drew significant attention in the bodybuilding world, he reflected on those years with unusual candor. He said that Lou never fully trusted him again, after what happened during the filming of Pumping Iron. He offered this not with remorse exactly, but with the measured tone of someone taking stock of the consequences of his own ambition. That acknowledgement reopened a story most people believed they already understood. Most people think they know the story of Arnold and Lou. They have seen Pumping Iron, they remember the breakfast scene, the pose down, the psychological maneuvering. They know the Austrian Oak defeated the Brooklyn Giant. What has only recently come into clearer focus through Arnold's own account is how deliberate that campaign was, how far it extended, and what it cost both men. The full picture is more complicated than the film suggested. To understand what happened between these two men, it helps to know where each of them started. Their backgrounds shaped the ambitions and vulnerabilities they each carried onto the stage. Lou Ferrigno grew up in Brooklyn. Born in 1951, he lost somewhere between 75 and 80% of his hearing in the first months of his life, the result of a series of ear infections. He was 3 years old before the condition was diagnosed. By the time he began school, he was already a target. Kids called him deaf, called him mute, and made the experience of childhood a sustained exercise in humiliation. His father, a police lieutenant named Matt Ferrigno, made no effort to conceal his disappointment. Lou was not the son he had envisioned. That rejection became a defining force in Lou's life. He found something to hold on to in comic books: the Hulk, Spider-Man, figures that were massive and unassailable, immune to dismissal. He began training at 13. Unable to afford weights, he filled pails with cement and balanced them on a broomstick. The kid, told he was not good enough, built himself into one of the most physically imposing athletes the sport had ever seen. By the time he was 17, standing in the crowd at the 1969 Mr. Olympia in Brooklyn, and watching a young Austrian competitor named Arnold Schwarzenegger walk off the stage, something clarified for him. Here was a man built on a similar scale. Here was evidence that someone like him could compete at the highest level. Arnold's background followed a different trajectory. Born in 1947 in Thule, a small town outside Graz, Austria, he was the son of a local police chief, another law enforcement father, another detail that would eventually draw comparisons between the two men. Arnold's father had little interest in his son's bodybuilding ambitions. He wanted Arnold to pursue something practical, a trade, an education, something with standing. The weights in the competition struck him as an embarrassment. Arnold began lifting at 15, initially as part of soccer training. After seeing a photograph of bodybuilding icon Reg Park, his sense of purpose shifted entirely. He wanted to be the best bodybuilder in the world, move to America, become a film star, and surpass every expectation that anyone in his family had ever held for him. He wanted to win consistently, definitively, and publicly. The drive Arnold brought to competition was methodical and total. He was relentless, calculating, and socially magnetic, and he paired those qualities with a cold precision when it came to opponents. He was not satisfied with physical superiority alone. He wanted to occupy their thinking before they ever stepped on stage. He later described what he called a two-pronged agenda: win the competition and make the process visible enough to build his public profile while doing so. By the early 1970s, Arnold had won the Mr. Olympia title multiple times. He was the dominant figure in bodybuilding, essentially without a serious challenger. Then Lou Ferrigno arrived. The bodybuilding world had not seen a competitor quite like Lou Ferrigno. He stood 6 feet 5 inches tall and competed at around 275 pounds. Those figures alone do not fully convey the impression he made. Bodybuilding in the early 1970s was populated by men who were large by the standards of the sport but would not have stood out in a modern gym. Ferrigno was different in kind, not just degree. After finishing high school in 1969, he won his first major title, IFBB Mr. America. He was still a teenager. He then traveled to Geneva and at 22 years old, defeated established competitors Ken Waller and Mike Katz to win the IFBB Mr. Universe title. The bodybuilding press took notice. Muscle Builder Flash Power magazine ran an image of Lou holding Arnold's severed head above his own, with the headline, "Bring me the head of Arnold Schwarzenegger." The image was designed to sell magazines, but it reflected a genuine shift in the sport's conversation. For the first time in years, there was a serious question about whether Arnold Schwarzenegger could be beaten. The 1974 Mr. Olympia was the first direct competition between them. Lou had not competed at that level before. Arnold had won the title 5 consecutive times. Arnold won again, but the margin, at least in the perception of fans and observers, was narrow. Lou had pressured the reigning champion in a way no one else had. He was bigger, he was younger, and he had years of development still ahead of him. The prospect of a future Schwarzenegger-Ferrigno showdown generated more sustained attention than the sport had seen in some time. Arnold had already developed a habit of studying his opponents not just physically, but psychologically. He looked for weaknesses not in their muscles, but in their minds. What he found when he looked at Lou Ferrigno was precisely the kind of vulnerability his approach was designed to exploit. Lou was deeply sensitive. He cared intensely what people thought of him. He had spent his childhood carrying the weight of his father's disapproval and the cruelty of peers who had made him feel worthless because of something he was born with. He had channeled that pain into building a body that made him physically impossible to dismiss, but the wounds underneath remained, and Arnold could see them. There is a scene in the 1977 documentary Pumping Iron that bodybuilding fans, psychology students, and observers of competitive mental strategy have studied for decades. It doesn't involve anyone lifting anything. There is no stage, no lights, no crowd. There is only a breakfast table. The morning before the 1975 Mr. Olympia competition, Arnold Schwarzenegger sat down to eat with Lou Ferrigno and Lou's parents. He was relaxed, easy, warm. He smiled at Lou's mother and made small talk. He appeared entirely unbothered. Then smoothly and without apparent effort, he began to erode Lou Ferrigno's confidence. He told Lou with what looked like genuine concern that it was a shame, that if Lou had had one more month of preparation, he would have been in perfect shape. As it stood, he was just slightly behind where he needed to be. Nothing to be ashamed of. He had won 2 Mr. Universe titles. That was something to be proud of. They could get through tomorrow's competition and move on. Then Arnold allowed himself a moment of open satisfaction. "You know, it's amazing," he said, smiling at everyone at the table. "Can you imagine the feeling I have? 6-time Mr. Olympia. 6 times, it's incredible." He was not bragging in any conventional sense. He was performing warmth and camaraderie while methodically undermining every belief Lou held about his own readiness. He was speaking directly to Lou's deepest insecurity, the fear that no matter how hard he trained or how much he sacrificed, he would never quite be enough. He was doing it in front of Lou's parents, which made it nearly impossible for Lou to push back without appearing ungrateful or oversensitive. And he was doing it with a smile that made the whole exchange look like encouragement. Decades later, Arnold described the strategy with considerable clarity. It was, he explained, a 2-pronged operation. One objective was to win the competition. The other was to be compelling enough on camera that he was building a public persona at the same time. He understood that Lou's Italian-American family background meant that family approval carried significant weight, so he targeted the family first. If they could be made to talk Lou down, even gently, Lou's own internal voice would do the rest. Drawing on his experience as a trainer, Arnold understood that identifying someone's psychological vulnerability and pressing on it could generate enough anxiety to compromise even a physically superior performance. It worked. Lou placed third. Arnold won his 6th Mr. Olympia title. But there was a cost to that victory that Arnold would spend the following 50 years quietly acknowledging. Pumping Iron was released in 1977 and became an immediate cultural phenomenon. It brought bodybuilding from a niche subculture that most mainstream Americans had little awareness of into something genuinely cinematic. It launched Arnold Schwarzenegger into a level of fame that would lead to Conan the Barbarian, the Terminator, and eventually the governorship of California. It made Lou Ferrigno prominent enough to land the role that would define his public image for the rest of his life, the Incredible Hulk. But Pumping Iron was not quite the straightforward documentary it presented itself as. As more people examined the production over the years, the constructed elements became apparent. Director George Butler had built the film around a deliberate dramatic structure. Arnold as the charismatic, faintly villainous champion, Lou as the earnest underdog. To reinforce those roles visually, Butler filmed Arnold's training sequences at the open, sun-drenched Gold's Gym and Muscle Beach. Lou's sequences were shot in a dim, confined basement gym, darker and more claustrophobic, designed to suggest someone working outside the mainstream. The 2002 documentary Raw Iron, which examined the making of the original film, disclosed something that surprised many viewers. Lou's father, Matty Ferrigno, was portrayed in Pumping Iron as Lou's intense, hands-on training coach, a demanding presence who pushed his son hard. In reality, Matty Ferrigno had had little involvement in Lou's training prior to the production. He was brought in specifically to generate dramatic tension and reinforce the underdog narrative. The coaching scenes were largely staged. Lou later confirmed that his relationship with his father during that period was complicated. He described it as a love-hate dynamic. His father had spent years making him feel inadequate, and the documentary reframed that difficult history as something more purposeful and dramatic than it had actually been. Lou was not simply competing against Arnold. He was carrying years of conditional approval onto that stage. and neither he nor the audience fully understood what they were watching. Even Arnold's most widely discussed moment in the film, his apparently cold explanation for why he had not returned home when his father died, choosing instead to remain focused on training, proved more complicated on examination. Arnold later stated that the story had been told to him by a French bodybuilder, and that he repeated it on camera because it served the narrative George Butler was constructing. What followed only complicated matters further. After the film's release, reports indicated that Arnold had, in fact, genuinely chosen not to attend his father's funeral. Whether the story originated with him or someone else, the effect was the same. It portrayed Arnold as someone prepared to set aside ordinary human obligations in the pursuit of winning. Depending on the perspective, that was either an accurate portrait or a performance he found difficult to separate himself from, even when the cameras were no longer running. At the 1975 Mr. Olympia in Pretoria, South Africa, as the competitors stood on stage waiting for the results, Arnold leaned over to Lou. The cameras were rolling, the audience was waiting, and Arnold said something directly into Lou's ear, quietly enough that no microphone captured it, something Lou would carry with him for decades. What exactly was said has never been fully confirmed. What is known is that Lou placed third, Arnold won, and something between them shifted in a way that has never fully resolved. Arnold spoke about it plainly in his December 2024 appearance on the Two Bears One Cave podcast, reflecting on his psychological campaign against Ferrigno, the breakfast incident, the manipulation, the competition, the whisper. He acknowledged that the damage was lasting. Lou had never really trusted him again since that moment, he said. He said it without extensive apology, but he said it. He named it. He acknowledged that his tactics, however calculated and effective, had a real cost to the person on the receiving end. That acknowledgement carries more weight than it might initially seem. Arnold Schwarzenegger is not a man who readily concedes that he has wronged someone. His public identity has long been built around relentless ambition and total commitment to his goals. Acknowledging that his tactics destroyed the trust of one of the most significant rivals of his career, and that the damage has never been repaired, is as close to a reckoning as Arnold is likely to offer about those years. Lou has largely confirmed this dynamic in his own terms. In a 2021 interview, he described Arnold during the pumping iron era as arrogant, not dismissively, but with a precision that suggested years of considered reflection. Arnold was the dominant figure, Lou was the challenger, and as Lou implied, Arnold understood exactly what he was doing. After pumping iron, both men moved to Hollywood, and the paths they took diverged in ways that were almost symmetrical in their contrast. Lou was cast as the Incredible Hulk. It became one of the most perfectly matched castings in television history, not by design, but because it drew directly on something genuine in Lou Ferrigno. He had spent his childhood imagining himself as the Hulk. He had said so himself. Growing up reading those comics, he had dreamed of becoming powerful enough that no one could diminish him again. And then he became the character. Green paint, wig, torn purple pants, embodying week after week a figure who transformed pain and rage into strength. Millions watched. Children who felt powerless recognized something of themselves in him. The show ran from 1977 to 1982, and Lou reprised the role for decades afterward, in animated versions, in made-for-TV movies. The Hulk became inseparable from Lou Ferrigno in the cultural imagination, in a way that went well beyond a single role. Arnold was building something of a different scale. In the late 1970s, Hollywood agents had told him his physique was too extreme, that he would never work as a leading man. He disregarded it. He made Conan the Barbarian in 1982. In 1984, The Terminator transformed his career entirely. Arnold became one of the most bankable movie stars on Earth. At his peak, reportedly the highest paid actor in the world. Predator, Total Recall, Terminator 2, True Lies followed. His presence in popular culture became something close to singular. The competition between the two men did not end when the bodybuilding stage did. It continued in a different form. Lou was the superhero on television. Arnold was the action star at the cinema. Neither man publicly framed it as a rivalry in Hollywood, the way they had in bodybuilding, but the parallel trajectories and the inevitable comparisons kept the dynamic present. Arnold then ran for governor of California and won in 2003, serving 2 terms, an achievement that placed their early bodybuilding rivalry in a much broader context. Lou, meanwhile, maintained a steady career in Hollywood for decades. Films, television, convention appearances, a recurring role as himself on The King of Queens. He also built a personal training business that at one point included Michael Jackson as a client. Lou trained Jackson on and off for 20 years, visiting his home and remaining close until Jackson's death in 2009. It is one of those biographical details that gives Lou Ferrigno's life a texture entirely independent of anything he shared with Arnold. The straightforward version of this story positions Arnold as the calculating aggressor and Lou as the wronged party. That version is not inaccurate, but it is incomplete. The fuller account requires paying attention to what Arnold has actually said about Lou over the years, not in managed public statements but in candid moments when something more direct comes through. In the 2024 podcast conversation, Arnold did not only acknowledge that Lou never trusted him again, he also described the breakfast table manipulation with a kind of detached appreciation for his own tactical precision that some found unsettling and others found clarifying. He laid out what he called his two-pronged agenda: winning and entertaining, with the composure of someone who has chosen to own his history rather than revise it. He described studying the psychology of his opponents the way a chess player studies a board. He located the pressure points and applied pressure. He said it plainly. He was not apologizing for the approach, but there's something in those interviews that tends to get overlooked. When Arnold speaks about Lou Ferrigno, there is genuine respect beneath the tactical analysis, a respect that rarely makes it into the quotes. He has acknowledged repeatedly that Lou was the one real threat to his dominance in bodybuilding. Not a manufactured rival for dramatic purposes, but an actual physical force that could have ended his reign if the competition had come down purely to size and mass. Lou was bigger. Lou was younger. Lou possessed the kind of genetic raw material that Arnold, with his trainer's eye, recognized as extraordinary. The psychological tactics weren't something Arnold deployed because Lou was weak. They were something he deployed because Lou was strong, and Arnold understood that the only reliable way to beat him was to ensure the contest never became entirely physical. That is a form of respect, even if it is also ruthless. Then there is the chess match. In early 2024, Arnold posted a photo on Instagram that resonated with people who had followed their story over the decades. It showed Arnold and Lou sitting across from each other at a table, a chessboard between them, in what appeared to be Arnold's home. Arnold's caption was simple and warm: "We never stopped competing." The image of these two men, silver-haired, still physically imposing by any ordinary standard, quietly playing chess together seemed to carry more weight than the moment itself. It was a peace offering, a continuation, a way of signaling that whatever passed between them in 1975, they remained in each other's lives, still connected by something that from a certain angle resembled affection. Lou, for his part, has largely chosen to navigate his feelings about Arnold with a hard-earned equanimity. In his September 2024 interview with Dennis James, he spoke about the rivalry calmly, as someone who had processed it thoroughly. He talked about longevity, about not carrying hate, about choosing positivity as a way of honoring everything he had overcome. He did not attack Arnold. He did not pretend the manipulation had not happened. He occupies a position somewhere between the two, a man who knows he was targeted by someone more strategically ruthless than himself, who has arrived at a kind of peace with that, but who also 50 years later does not fully trust the man who did it. That is the complicated reality of what Arnold thinks about Lou Ferrigno. He thinks about him with respect, with tactical admiration for the physical threat he represented, with the quiet awareness of someone who knows his greatest victories were won at a human cost. He did not always stop to measure. He values the friendship, or whatever form of friendship two men with this kind of history can sustain. He plays chess with him. He posts the photographs. He tells the stories with a transparency that suggests he is no longer trying to manage the narrative, only to tell it honestly. But he also acknowledges without much ceremony that he broke something, that there is a version of Lou Ferrigno's trust that existed before that breakfast table, before that stage, before that whisper, and that version no longer exists. Arnold took it. He used it to win, and he has carried that knowledge for half a century.